Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and limitations it may have and what we can't really predict as far as astrology goes. There's really not many things we could predict with 100% certainty. I really don't think as far as astrology goes. But anyway, here are some real significant things, though. If we're talking about, for example, death and longevity, in one's natal chart. Now, some people may have certain placements. They could have like Jupiter in the 8th or Sagittarius on the 8th house cusp, which could be fortuitous as far as living longer, as far as the situations go in terms of their death. They might live a longer life. Saturn in the 8th house. Saturn can be about old age. You have it in the 8th house. There may be a propensity to live longer. But you also, or say Capricorn on the cusp of the 8th house may give longer longevity, so to speak, but there's still no guarantee or assurance in that, because remember, you could always have some transit or something that might impact that. If you have, like, say, transit Uranus hitting your 8th house, well, then you might be in a situation where you might, sadly, some people may succumb to an unusual death. I mean, like, such as like one of those construction cranes hitting you, if that's possible to die from that, or some kind of candy machine falling on you, or just some accident. Like, you ever see those those bread rollers, and that use those rollers for the dough, or somebody gets caught up in it or something, or attacked by an alligator. So you just really don't really. The thing about it is there's so many things and contraindicators. And again, the bread roller example, that's something, or dough roller, most of you probably know what I'm trying to say. That is something, I mean, I don't know if that could actually cause it, but you understand what I'm getting at. And the thing about it is, you could also, I mean, the next thing I want to talk about, as far as this goes, as far as things that are limited in terms of predicting in astrology, well, another thing is one's intellectual ability and level. And the thing about it is, you look at certain placements in a natal chart, right? You could say, well, somebody has their Mercury well placed by sign and it's well aspected. Say it doesn't make any adverse aspects to it. It could say if you have it conjunct, sextile, or even trine Uranus. I mean, you could have a lot of good things in it, but I don't think that is going to give a guarantee or assurance of like exceptionally high IQ. Somebody that has Mercury conjunct sextile trine Uranus may have certain innovative ability. They may very well have an above average IQ, but there's no way of really ascertaining like the exact IQ, the precise number, or whether somebody is always necessarily above average or below average as far as their intelligence quotient goes. Now, I think what's interesting, you look at renowned columnist, magazine columnist, author Marilyn Vos Savant, who ironically enough, she refutes astrology. She says she doesn't think it has any credibility or credence. But the thing about her is, now she was tested like she was 10 years old, according to Wikipedia.org, and she had stayed, I guess it was like September 1956, she had been tested at 10 years old and had an IQ of 228. At the time, I believe it was the highest recorded IQ for a child. And the thing about it is, she does have some aspects that really, I mean, there's one aspect that stood out to me in her chart. She has the North Node conjunct Uranus in Gemini, so I noticed like a lot of her like questions, I mean, she'll be answering are connected with brain teasers, so that could be the indicator of one's future being tied in to having this genius level ability to answer brain teasers and brain problems that you're trying to solve. And in terms of, again, like the brain teasers that I'm talking about now, logic problems. Now, but the thing about it is, you could have other people born right near the same time as she does, and it may not manifest that way. I mean, if she was, let's say you took another person that was born on the same exact date with the same year and near at or near the same time, that doesn't mean that other person is going to have that same intelligence level. And but the thing about, going back to Marilyn Vos Savant, I just wanted to talk about too, is that though at the time when she was tested and apparently had that recorded IQ of 228, transit Uranus was likely near her natal Mercury in Leo, so it's not surprising. I mean, in a way, she was tested and had this she tested for basically a genius level IQ. Uranus is the planet connected with genius. Mercury, of course, is our thinking, our intelligence, and being in Leo, it's really not bewildering that she got notoriety and exposure for this. Now, another thing I want to talk about as far as what's difficult to predict in astrology, the thing about it is it's also how much money one may make and whether one is 100% going to be prosperous or affluent or not. Now, in astrology, there can be a number of indicators in one's natal chart which can give a proclivity toward affluence, making a lot of money. Somebody, for example, they could have Jupiter in the second house. It could be like they could have a sextile or trine from Jupiter to their natal Venus. Their part of fortune may conjunct Jupiter and or Venus and have these places and have a part of fortune in the second house. But that doesn't necessarily, I would say, it doesn't give a guarantee or assurance of prosperity or wealth. I have my part of fortune is in Gemini, actually conjuncts my second house cusp, I'm at a very low level income. And the thing about it is, a lot of times the part of fortune can just indicate, as far as the placement by sign and house, where you have that potential to make your fortune, to make your highest income. But it does, I don't think it necessarily means that one is going to make an exorbitant amount of money. My greatest potential, according to the part of fortune placement, is through something with communication, and of course being the second house, something that I could strongly value, and being in the money house, that does help, but it doesn't. But you could see, like in my example, it doesn't guarantee that one is going to make a lot of money. Yes, there's contraindicators that can modify this as well. Like, for example, I have Saturn square my Venus in my natal chart. So when you look at that, I mean, that could be playing a role too in terms of my financial woes at this point, lack of a better word. But anyway, another thing too that we can't necessarily, I know we can't ascertain just from a chart and not seeing the person, is somebody's exact or precise appearance. Now, we take somebody, for example, that has, let's say they have the North Node conjunct their ascendant. I mean, North Node conjunct the ascendant can often indicate the person might be a lot taller, or at least a little bit taller than average. Or Uranus conjunct the ascendant can do that. If I'm not mistaken, talk show host Conan O'Brien, I think he has Uranus conjunct the ascendant. You may want to confirm that, and look that up. And he's like 6'4" or something. He's got a Virgo ascendant. But the thing about it is, when you look at these things, I mean, you could take somebody that has a Taurus ascendant and has the North Node conjunct it, and that person might be a little bit taller than the typical Taurus, but you don't know the person's ethnicity, you don't know their race. There's certain, I mean, I'm saying if you're just looking at the chart by itself and you don't actually see the person there, you can't, there's certain races and ethnic groups that might be taller or shorter than the other. So all these things have to be factored in the equation. Now, I mean, Saturn on the ascendant might limit the size, the physical stature to some degree, but if the person, say, is in a family of tall people, that person might, instead of like being, like, say, the average height for males in that person's family tree was like 6'4", that person might be 6'1", say if they had Saturn or the South Node on the ascendant. And if Gemini is rising, you got to factor that into the equation. I had a friend of mine, use the term loosely, back in New York. He has Gemini rising, had Saturn on the ascendant, but he was like 6'2" in height. So I mean, it's just, a lot of it is very difficult because you have to factor so many things in the equation. Now, another thing is that it's hard to determine 100% if one is going to be married or have a significant other. Now, there are things in a chart which could be more auspicious for that and give greater proclivity toward marriage, but it doesn't guarantee that a person is going to be married. I mean, you could have, hold on a moment, people. For example, you could have Jupiter in the 7th house, or conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Juno. Those could be very good placements for marriage. And say your Jupiter is not making any adverse aspects to any other planets in the process. A well-aspected Venus might give a promising marriage in many cases, and well-placed Venus. Say if somebody has Gemini on the cusp of their 7th house, that could be an indicator for 2 marriages. Remember, Gemini is the dual sign. It's a sign of the twins. Where Gemini is placed in the chart, it can indicate where people might feel where it's safer to have more than one of something. I have Gemini on the cusp of my 2nd house in my natal chart, and it seems like I have a lot I call twosies in terms of possessions, a lot of duplications, a lot of twos of things. So I think that's got something to do with that. But you have to remember too, transits can factor into things as well. And say, I mean, if it's a time when you're about ready to get married, but let's say transit Saturn is hitting the 7th house, that could be delayed, and maybe it causes some issues where you just and it leads to a point you don't marry that person, and maybe for whatever reason you might not marry. You might not ever get married after that situation. So it really it becomes very very difficult. I mean, astrology and even just the natal chart, I mean, is very intricate. It's like a big piece of machinery with many proponents in it. So it just makes things very difficult because you have so many, again, contraindicators as well. Now, last but not least, I wanted to talk about, I mean, people have asked, before, hey, is there any way you could really see if somebody's a murderer in their horoscope? Now, I don't think there's any guarantee of that. Somebody can have Pluto making an adverse aspect to their natal Mars, but and then you might have one person that may have some real murderous tendencies, but maybe the 9 or 10 other people may have that aspect and may not, because most people aren't murderers. And the thing about it is, I mean, somebody that has a very strongly afflicted Scorpio energy, could have some issues, or have certain tendency, a little bit more proclivity toward murder, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And the thing is, and again, it goes back to the point that simply, you common sense, that we know that most people don't murder. There was someone named, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, was it Omar Mateen, that one that went into that? It was like some gay nightclub or something and started shooting people. Now, if I remember right, he's a sun in Scorpio, and it wouldn't surprise me if his sun in Scorpio was afflicted. The thing is too, and of course, being the sun in Scorpio, sun could be about where we get our attention, sadly, and notoriety, and he did it sadly. He got it by killing others, but this is very isolated, of course. And again, most people, regardless of their astral placements, are not going to be murderers. And you may have a lot of people that have volatile tendencies, but not as far as murder goes. No, I mean. Anyway, I mean, you look at someone like a Charles Manson. He had some strong Scorpio energy in his chart. He also had Pluto and a Grand Cross configuration in his chart. So Pluto was strongly afflicted. But we're talking about very rare and isolated examples, of course. And anyway, and I want to go back to one other thing too I thought was interesting. We're talking about death. I want to go back to the first thing I talked about as far as the astrology and the limitations, what we can predict. The thing about it is, we may not know it precisely when somebody may die, but sometimes we could get some kind of inclination where a group of people might succumb to a certain catastrophe, where you may have a number of deaths. When we had the Hurricane Katrina, I couldn't believe it when I saw this transit, how precise this was. It was like Hurricane Katrina, when it hit New Orleans, Louisiana, you had transit Uranus and Pisces was either at an exact conjunction to the natal Pluto in Pisces of New Orleans, or it was very close to an exact conjunction to it. And you're talking about Uranus, planet associated with disaster, hurricanes, and of course hitting Pluto, the planet of death and extremism. I mean, and you're talking about being in Pisces. Pisces can be manifest in flooding, and of course the sea, and of course it was very inundated, to say the least, New Orleans, as a result of that hurricane. Thing, and many people did die because of that, and you had a group of people that did succumb to it, but again, there's no guarantee of that, and as well, so there's really not many things I don't think we could really know 100% through astrology. I mean, everybody say that's born with a Taurus ascendant, maybe everyone at least has some Taurian traits, as an example, that they express outwardly, but there's really, I mean, as one basic example, but there's really not many things that we can really, and of course that applies to the other ascendants as well. But anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.